Welcome back to another episode of the Overnight Success Podcast. I'm Kristi, co-founder, the optimization specialist, and I'm excited to be joined by not only a friend, but a colleague. Her name is Christina Olivarez, and I'm so excited to introduce her. She has not only stood on the TEDx stage, she's helped create communities behind the Social Butterfly Gal and Hustle and Socialize conference. She's empowered women from the ideate phase all the way up into they have these major successful businesses. And today we're going to dive into some of those leadership skills that she brings. But first, we're going to talk about her journey and how she started. She is an award-winning executive leadership coach. Like I mentioned, been on that TEDx stage, and I know she has a ton of value to bring to us today. So Christina, welcome to the Overnight Success Podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm thrilled to be on this podcast and we're going to have some fun.
Cool. Well, if you don't mind, let's hop in and I'll ask you, let's hear a little bit more about you. I know you've been in business for over 10 years, but talk to the audience about what that's looked like, because the whole intention is this is the quote unquote overnight success, right? But we all know it takes time. So let's hear it.
Yeah, when I got started, I was actually maybe about 2 years fresh out of college. I started my company at 24. And I think at that time, we were seeing the rise of social media. And I come from a background of broadcast journalism. All my life, I wanted to be that news reporter that you see everywhere from like Good Morning America to E. That was, I just wanted to be on television. I felt like that was what I was called for, and I was ready to do whatever possible to get on TV. So when I was in college, I did almost every internship you could think of, whether it was here in San Antonio interning at WOAI, Ken's 5, KSAT, all the way to even interning with nonprofits just to see how I could use my broadcast journalism skills to amplify their voices on the internet. And that was when I was really starting to see, oh, there's this thing called social media where so many business owners were starting to create their profiles and their platforms. And instead of just using social media to chat with their friends, they were utilizing it to market their offers and their products to their audience. And around 2014, 2015, I was really struggling to find a job in broadcast television. And around that time frame, I started a blog called the Social Butterfly Gal. And my whole goal was, hey, I'm going to document everything that I'm doing in public relations and see where this takes me. I think I just wanted to keep myself occupied and keep my brain occupied because I was really just struggling with the fact that I couldn't find a job. And so maybe about a year after that, that was when I was really getting to know that, hey, there's this thing called social media, and so many people need people like me to help manage their social media. And so in May of 2015, I created the Social Butterfly Gal business. And around that time, all I was doing was consulting with different companies on how they could elevate their social media presence and their digital presence. And then I was managing the social media of different restaurants in the local community, different events. But I think what I really recognized was not only was I great at strategy and great at amplifying those brands, but I also was great in public speaking and I was great in coaching. And a lot of the clients that I was starting to work with from a social media perspective were mostly women. And I think like that is kind of like where I was recognizing like, hey, women are not just coming to me because of social media. They're coming to me because they see something within me that they want to also have with their visibility, with their leadership. And so I feel like that first iteration phase of my company was all just built on gaining the frameworks and the strategies to be able to say, hey, I have this, credibility with social media. Now let me kind of like pivot and see how I could explore what that would look like that's not social media related.
Absolutely. That's really cool, Christina. And what I want to dive into a couple of these things that you just mentioned. So first, really neat that you use the word visibility. That is our guiding word this year at Optimization Specialist. So that's part of the reason we're doing this podcast. So you being on this podcast, our intention is to create visibility for you as well, and but also for our branding as well, right? And so I also want to dive into, you talk about amplifying voices. You talk about um, really creating this community in this space. But you started with this iteration of the business. So this was early on in your journey. And as you were working with these customers, these clients, these women, you started to create what we call your ideal customer persona or avatar, right? So
Right.
you were continuing to iterate as you were building your business, as you were looking at, hey, I'm I'm finding traction. I'm finding my product market fit. I'm figuring out what my audience wants. And you're building all of that and giving back at the same time. So, talk us through a little bit over the last 10 years how that's enhanced, pivoted, elevated. Let's talk through that.
So I like to call my first 10 years of my entrepreneurship journey as chapters in my life and the seasons. And I think almost every single entrepreneur can maybe relate to this because who I was at 24 is definitely not who I am right now at 34, which is definitely going to look different when I'm 44 and so on, right? So I like to call them like these phases where I sort of did have a specific archetype, a specific client. But as I iterated and as I kind of pivoted, I pivoted my company maybe about 3 to 4 times in the last 10 years. So, like I said, I first started with social media management, and that client was any type of corporation, any type of like client that was looking for social media. It could be a restaurant, it could be an event, it could be anything, right? And as I sort of shifted and pivoted to the conference and Hustle and Socialize, my second business actually got started in 2018 after not being able to find a really great community for women of color, specifically for Latinas. I was often going into all of these networking circles locally and being the only Latina in the room. And I always thought that that was weird because we live in San Antonio. And so that client was starting to kind of fill out as I was recognizing. And so there was this point in my career around 2022. I was already, I would say maybe like 7 years in business already, where I recognized like, hey, I don't recognize who my ideal client is. So I had to go back to the drawing board because the clients that fit the social media type are not the clients that are coming to me for coaching. They're the clients that, are people that are wanting that leadership aspect. And so I had to go back to the basics. And I think that that's something that almost every entrepreneur needs to know is like, no, it doesn't have to be so complicated. The same client archetype that you do in that first sort of startup phase is the same thing that you will continue to do as you iterate over and over and over again. And I'm a person that really is data driven. I think that you can learn so much with the information that you have. And so something that I was doing a lot in the time that I was pivoting was I was collecting all of the information of every single client that would work with me. So I would ask a series of questions that allowed me to kind of get an idea of why are they coming to me? What is their struggles? What are their challenges? What are, the things that they see in me that I might not see in myself as their coach? And really kind of put together this archetype of being able to see who my ideal client is. And I feel like when you have created a powerful brand, when you have created something that is really legacy driven and you're wanting to be sustainable, that also comes with the iteration of yourself. And so we grow so much as individuals throughout every single year of our life. And I think that's one thing that has been my strongest superpower, if you will, is as I've continued to grow, I've always asked the hard questions within myself that have allowed me to figure out bits and pieces of my business. And so those questions would be like, hey, who am I right now that maybe doesn't fit anymore that ideal client, because the ideal clients are always shifting as well. And I think like that has always been a part of my journey, was really kind of doing a lot of reflection work, doing a lot of data driven decisions and gathering of that data, and doing a lot of listening. So many entrepreneurs don't listen to their audience. They're often talking to their audience. And I think a huge lesson that I've had to learn in the last decade is really to sit back, slow down, and listen, because that's the only way that you are really going to listen and be able to understand your audience, if you listen to what challenges and problems that they're facing.
Dropping bombs. Christina, fire. So good, so good. I love all of this. And you're really talking to the growth and the expansion, and how do you continue to build a business that lasts and that can scale. And something that we connected on early on, I want to dive into a little bit more because it makes me really happy too, is data.
Yeah.
And I know you track, because we've both talked about the EOS model, which is that entrepreneurial operating system,
Yeah.
and it looks at the key components of the business, right? And how has that helped you? I know when we first connected, our story goes way back before we even met in person. We met virtually through a mutual connection online, right? So
Yeah.
super cool how we live in such a global society. But the biggest thing is that I, I I can attest in our business and what we do for customers is, if you're not tracking the things and you're not really putting in the time to measure what's working and what's not, it doesn't work. But I would love to hear from you how that has impacted your business.
It's impacted so much, because I feel specifically with the EOS model, in those times of iteration, in those times that I'm like, hey, we need a pivot, it's kind of like my Bible. It's kind of like the thing that I go back to. And I feel like when I am ideating and understanding more about my mission and my vision, and even just the metrics that are going to move me forward, I have a guideline. I have a blueprint, if you will, that is going to take me further because I've gotten it. And so something that I've done a lot in the last decade is, whenever I feel like I need to sit down and go back to that EOS model in particular, it's usually when I'm in a huge pivot. And so that's why it's really important to understand the mission and the vision, because the mission and the vision actually will drive everything forward, and it's your North Star. It allows you to see, hey, am I in alignment with the work that I'm being called to do? And I feel like that's where I'm at right now, is the work that I'm doing and the pivots that I'm making. It's because I've been called to do this work. And when I recognized that social media management wasn't in alignment anymore, I had to make the really tough decision and say, hey, I'm not going to do that anymore, even though that was a good 85% of my revenue. And it was scary and it was nerve wracking because I didn't know what I was going to do. But then again, I would always go back to that model. And one of the things that I like so much is understanding too, like the bits and pieces of your audience and their buying habits, because every year their buying habits change depending on where we're at in the economy, depending on where they're at in their seasons of life. You know, a new mom might not want to make that investment in something that, you know, may be not in their season that they're in. And so I think that's also something that I've taken pride in, is getting to understand how to make the decisions based off of what I have collected, and always going back to that North Star. Because anytime you feel like you're out of alignment, or that you kind of just want to throw this away, burn it to the ground, it's always going back to your why and figuring out, like, why are you doing this? And I think that that's something that I've had to really get centered in, is my why. Because yeah, my why has changed over the last 10 years, but there's still something at its core that hasn't changed. And so that's something that I have to sit in as an entrepreneur.
Yeah. And that's so powerful. I want to segue and ask you a question behind taking action, even if you're scared. So, what you're saying right now is, I'm hearing you're a business baddie, which is why I'm honored to call you a friend, because you've done so much to create this impact for women, specifically because that's your ideal customer, right? Is a woman trying to create visibility. And it started with social media. It's leaned more into coaching and consulting. And as you're looking, you've also stood on the TEDx stage. I know you've been in panels and given keynote speeches and delivered multiple workshops. Your conference is now nationwide attested. People are coming in all over to see what you're producing. So I think in general, I'll call it as a woman, but in general as a human, is it's scary to do those hard things. So how do you push yourself to do those hard things? Because at the end of the day, you're saying you're aligned with your why. You're doing this because you're called to make an impact in others' lives. But in general, how do you continue to push that? That's kind of a big question, I think. But what are your thoughts?
I'm super big on human design. And so I lead with human design. And human design, I don't know if like you know about it or your audience might know about it, but it's usually kind of like the pathway of who you are at your core based off of the timing of your birth and like where the cosmos were at when you were born, and it gives you sort of this archetype of like who you are at your core. And so mine, I'm a generator, which makes sense because usually I'm the light and I'm the force and I'm things that kind of just, like a generator. And so I look to those types of callings and work related, but it not going to sugarcoat it. Like there have been moments where, yeah, I don't want to move forward. I feel almost every day sometimes really scared about making the right move because at my core, unfortunately, I'm a perfectionist. And high achievers, and something that I'm having to unlearn is, as a high achiever, I want to figure out how to do it right. And so I got to fit all my puzzle pieces to find the right puzzle piece. And for so many women, so many humans, that kind of stifles the growth. And I think that for me, leading with my human design, but also getting really in my inner core, doing a lot of reflection, doing a lot of healing has allowed me to put one foot in front of the other. And I think even in a scary time, sometimes I'm like, hey, this is what I need in order to grow. Because my body, I want to feel safe in everything that I do. And I'm recognizing at this point in my life and my career, the circumstances and the achievements and all the milestones and everything that you want, that's the outside validation of safety. Only you can create your own safety, not the accolades and the money and everything else. And I think like that is what carries me forward, because there have been moments, including right now, where I'm being called to hit a specific challenge and I've never done it before. And I don't have proof that I've done it before, but I'm not going to just sit and say, all right, yeah, I am scared. I've never done this before, but it's like, all right, how do we figure this out? Like, what do we got to do to push forward? Because the train's always moving. Like the trains are always going to move and they're going to move without me. And I think that's just the leadership skills and the leadership style that I have is I'm going to push forward. And even if I fail, even if it doesn't work, they're all lessons that are going to propel me forward. And now I know what not to do in the next coming years.
Absolutely. And that's the only way we can learn, right? Is we can't continue to plan and plan and plan. We do have to execute and we do have to take action. And I think that just knowing your story and knowing how you make that impact for others is what you do. You do generate action. And I think progress, not perfection. Any woman, any human could really relate to that, right? I had a mentor tell me one time, if you're not embarrassed by the first draft, then you're doing it wrong. Like ultimately, that's because we're spending too much time planning and not executing. And I think a big thing that I've learned from you too is put yourself out there. It's a no unless you ask, right? And like even asking you to be on this podcast, I'm like, Christina, will you please? And I felt like I'm like courting a friend and like, we want your voice on our podcast. And it's really exciting because today you've dropped a ton of knowledge and wisdom and expertise because you don't know what you don't know. And as business owners, as entrepreneurs, we're often wearing a lot of hats, but as you've scaled over the last 10 years, how have you been able to delegate? I think as entrepreneurs who continue to hit those glass ceilings, I'll call them glass ceilings as you bust through those challenges. Um, at the optimization specialist, we're big on automating, but at some level, there's still a people component to this. So, how have you delegated, and as you've scaled, those systems have helped you continue to make the impact to your audience too?
One of the biggest things that I did was delegate the logistics portion of Hustle and Socialize. But it took me at most up to 5 years to finally be able to do that. And that was because I was still in the systems portion, in the processes. So I knew before I delegated, I need to have my processes set in stone. So that way when I delegate, it's already there. This is what we got to do. And I'm giving it to somebody with full trust. And so I delegated a lot of the logistical portion of the actual event so that I can show up and do what I'm being called to do, which is speak and play and have fun and not worry about, oh, there's no toilet paper in the bathroom, we got to go find toilet paper, or, all the logistical things that happen during an event. And so I think that that's something that I've really been able to do. It's still a team of me, myself, and I, even 10 years in, there are times where I will contract out in specific seasons and specific moments. So, when tax season comes around, I will delegate that to a CPA. I'll delegate it to a bookkeeper. I delegate my branding photos and hire different contractors. But I know that my leadership right now, I don't have the capacity to be able to manage a team or to manage somebody, which is why I lean on the automations and the systems that are going to help me at least get the job done. And so I think ultimately it's, if you're trying to figure out what to delegate, where to create a system, where to create a process, I always start first with let's create the actual systems and processes first, so that it could alleviate the pain when you do delegate, because at the end of the day, you're still going to have to train that person. You're still going to have to manage that person. And then if you are thinking about delegating, I always have my clients do this. Actually, when we think about leadership, I always have my clients do a delegate and elevate list. And so it's kind of like what they do in the EOS model, but it's a list of what are the things that only they can do. And that's their zone of genius, right? And then what are the things that they're like, I could do it, but someone else could do it? And then what are the things that they really hate doing? And that's where you start understanding what your zone of genius is. And then what are the things that, hey, I could pass that on. I know for me personally, I'm already getting to a point where I've gone this far enrolling clients and doing sales. But in order for me to take it to the next level, I know I need to delegate that. I know I need to bring somebody on that has more of that experience, because I could spend a lot of my time learning that skill, which would be fantastic. I still have to, exercise that muscle. But I know that my zone of genius is being on camera and talking and speaking and, doing the things that really, really light me up. And I think like that's where I'm at in this period of time, is figuring out where to delegate. But I will say it's so flashy and amazing to grow and to hire, but you really have to be ready for that. And that doesn't mean like be ready from a financial standpoint. That also means like time and energy, because you might want to hire somebody to alleviate specific tasks, but that's also time and energy that you have to put in training and, making sure that they're on task and doing all the things. And sometimes the CEOs that I've worked with in my programs, that's where they get it a little wrong, because I think they want somebody to take away the pain, when in reality, they're still spending their time and their energy on that. And so I think it's really important to know beforehand what really needs to be delegated, and what are some systems and processes that you can do that maybe can automate it so that you don't have to spend thousands of dollars trying to hire somebody.
Yeah, that's powerful. And I think you're spot on. Create the system. You want to train somebody on how you want that action to be completed. And if you're bringing them in, that's going to take your resources. So very powerful. Well, I guess the last question I have for you as we start to wrap up here, Christina, is if you have any words of like wisdom, not that you haven't dropped a ton in this podcast, but if you could put it into like, hey, I've been in business for 10 years, and this is the biggest thing that I've learned as I've become, as we mentioned, a quote unquote overnight success. What is one piece of advice or wisdom you would share with the audience today?
My one piece of advice is understand how to regulate your nervous system. It has nothing to do with business strategy. It has everything to do with how do you handle situations, because entrepreneurship is really like the biggest therapy session you could ever have. It tests you in so many ways. And I feel that something I never thought I would have to overcome is really understanding how to regulate my nervous system. As I've continued to grow, and be sustainable for this long, and even have setbacks and moving forward and everything, one of the biggest things that I've had to learn is how to calm myself, how to combat those negative thoughts, and understand the patterns that I have that wouldn't really have been uncovered had I not started a business. And I always tell people, like, oh man, your first 2 years are actually the easiest. Like, so many people think the startup phase is like the hardest. And I'm like, no, what's hard is keeping it going year after year after year after year, because there's always going to be some new flashy person, business, strategy, industry. But the ones who are really doing the work and being called to that transformation are the ones who are regularly working on themselves. And I think that that's the biggest thing that I've had to learn, specifically in the last 2 years. There's always a question that I ask myself is like, it didn't really feel this hard until the pandemic. And I realized like, oh, well, in the pandemic, I was isolated. And those were things that I had to really kind of push through, being by myself and not seeing people, right? And healing from that, because it was really isolating. And so I feel like if you are somebody who really sees, if you're legacy driven, if you believe that you're not just here for the clout, or you're not just here for the business sexiness of it all, if you really prioritize longevity, you're really going to have to learn how to regulate your nervous system, and really how to push through, not just like survival mode, but like reimagine how you're going to push through in times of testing.
That's powerful. And I definitely agree. Entrepreneurship will push you in ways that you didn't even know were possible.
Yeah.
So very powerful. Yes, thank you for that. Well, Christina, I know you have a big conference coming up, so I'd love to hear a little more about that. And then also, where can the audience connect with you?
Absolutely. So Hustle and Socialize 2025 is happening in San Antonio, June 6th and 7th at Hotel Contessa. This is for high achieving Latinas and women of color who want to scale their visibility, their profitability, and really wanting to build a legacy with the leadership skills that allow them to build that legacy. Here at our conference, we focus a lot on visibility strategies and getting to the core of what you need to do in order to scale your company, but also prioritize strategies that elevate your life. And so right now, tickets are on sale. We have a very limited amount of tickets. We've got only less than 100 left. So tickets you could find on our website as hustleandsocialize.com to get those tickets. Tickets will be on sale until May 31st or when we're sold out. And then everybody can connect with me on Instagram at the Social Butterfly Gal, as well as on LinkedIn. You can search Christina Giovanna Olivarez, and then socialbutterflygal.net is my website.
Amazing. And I will say that conference last year, I was an attendee and I got to be kind of on both sides of the platform there, and it was amazing. And the connections that are built there are invaluable. The women that I know attended that conference last year, they've had success and scale that they would not have had they not made A, those connections, but B, the training, the leadership skills that they learned. So Christina, congratulations and kudos on everything that you've achieved so far. I can't wait to see what the next decade holds in store for you. And thank you for being on the Overnight Success. We'll have you back soon.
Thank you so much.